I used to think that staying quiet was the safer option, not just for me personally, but for everyone whose lives might be affected by what I could do if the truth ever got out. Because if no one knew what I was capable of, then no one could manipulate me into using it, no one could twist it into something dark or dangerous, and no one I cared about would be dragged into the storm that might follow. For years, I convinced myself that anonymity was protection, that invisibility meant freedom, that the best way to keep my life intact was to live in the shadows of silence, buried beneath layers of routine and obedience, hidden behind the hum of servers, filtered lights, and the mechanical rhythm of machinery that never stopped breathing down there in the government labs. I told myself, again and again, that being aware of something terrible didn't necessarily obligate me to act, and I wrapped that cowardice in a blanket of logic until it felt like wisdom. But every lie has a breaking point. That illusion shattered the day I saw the boy on the clinic steps. He was no older than 5, maybe 6 if I'm being generous, bundled in a tattered coat that looked like it had already passed through 3 or 4 siblings before it found its way to him. His skin carried the color of illness, a pale, washed-out gray tinged with a yellow of something chronic, and his lips were cracked, as if he hadn't had enough clean water or rest in weeks. His eyes were empty in a way children's eyes should never be, hollowed out from whatever he was breathing every day, every hour, without protection or escape. He coughed so violently and so often that it seemed like each breath might be his last, and every time his chest collapsed inward, struggling to refill, I watched his mother's knuckles turn white from gripping his tiny hand, as if her willpower alone could keep his lungs going. They sat outside the underfunded clinic in a forgotten part of the city, ignored by the crowds that streamed past like ghosts, and when I looked at them, really looked, I understood exactly who was responsible for that boy's suffering. Dominic Crane. Crane Tech wasn't just a corporation. It was a kingdom, a sprawling machine powered by data and reinforced by lies. The public saw a brilliant billionaire who revolutionized the city's infrastructure, who donated to hospitals, who appeared in clean suits on magazine covers and panels talking about sustainability and urban health. But I didn't watch the news. I watched the raw data. And the story the data told was different. Beneath every polished report and every smiling press release, there was a dark undercurrent that no one wanted to acknowledge, one of deliberate, quiet harm. Crane didn't just influence the air that people breathed. He engineered it. He bought control over the smart wind corridors, the carbon scrubbers, the air purification algorithms, the pressure zones, and the silent turbines hidden on rooftops and embedded inside skyscrapers. And, with that control, he made a choice. He diverted the worst of the emissions, carbon, sulfur, heavy metals, and particles too small for the naked eye, away from the districts where the rich and influential lived, and instead rerouted them into neighborhoods that had no money, no voice, and no defenses. The alerts that should have screamed danger remained silent because the thresholds had been changed in the software, moved upward, line by line, until the sensors no longer recognized poison as poison. I watched the slow spread of the rot with growing horror, noting the patterns in wind direction, analyzing hospital admission spikes, cross-referencing chemical traces with factory outputs. And every new connection, every overlooked anomaly, made it clearer. This wasn't a glitch or an oversight. It was by design. At first, I thought I could collect enough evidence to expose it. I archived every corrupted report, documented each manipulated air pattern, created encrypted backups of altered logs. But deep down, I already knew the truth. No one was coming to stop him. The regulators were in his pocket. The journalists either too afraid or too compromised to run the story, and the public too overwhelmed to recognize the pattern buried beneath technical jargon and corporate noise. It wasn't that the truth didn't matter, it's that the truth had been drowned. So I stopped waiting for justice and became something else. The first move I made was barely noticeable. A drone, one of Crane's sleek, branded surveillance flyers, was performing a live demo over a newly opened environmental hub. With the gentlest twist of my wrist, I redirected the air around one rotor blade, just enough to destabilize the system. The drone spiraled out of control, dropped into a reflecting pool, and shorted out in front of dozens of cameras. Crane Tech issued a statement within an hour. Faulty calibration. Firmware update. Case closed. But that was just the beginning. I began experimenting with his buildings, manipulating airflow to trigger HVAC failures, overheat data centers, and disable filtration panels. A minor pressure shift on the 43rd floor of Tower 7 caused condensation to form in an electrical control room. The short circuit triggered a brief evacuation, though no one was harmed. It made headlines for less than a day. Crane replaced the equipment, praised his crisis response team, and carried on. But he had no idea that the wind had stopped obeying him, and it was listening to me. Every failure gave me more confidence, and more importantly, more precision. I stopped reacting and started orchestrating. His empire was built to withstand digital attacks, social scandals, and political resistance. It wasn't built to fight something as old and ungovernable as weather. I pushed further. His private elevator was my next test. I allowed it to ascend 2/3 of the way to the top floor before forcing a momentary stall. 10 seconds of darkness. Just long enough to turn a routine ride into a moment of pure dread. The emergency lights flickered. When it resumed, nothing appeared wrong. But I knew the seed had been planted. Soon after, I adjusted the climate in his penthouse gym, raising humidity while lowering airflow. His morning workout left him gasping for breath, his skin sticky with sweat, his concentration fraying. He blamed the building systems and ordered replacements. It didn't matter. I had already moved on. Then came the speech. The one where he planned to announce a citywide initiative to bring equitable air purification to all districts, complete with hollow promises and a stage built to impress. He stood on the rooftop of the tallest tower he owned, framed by sunrise and drone cameras, dressed in that carefully curated blend of approachable billionaire and stern innovator. I was already there. As he opened his arms to address the world, I called the wind. A focused stream of air knocked over the lectern. The cue cards scattered like dry leaves. A second gust disabled the sound system. His voice vanished into static. His earpiece fried in a pop of sparks. The stream cut out. The broadcast went dark for 3 full seconds. And when it returned, he was squinting directly into the lens, confused, angry, and most of all, unsure. He hadn't felt unsure in years. The next day, he vanished from public life. They said he was focusing on internal operations. In truth, he retreated to a compound deep in the hills, accessible only by private aircraft, fortified with every form of sensor and shield he could buy. He surrounded himself with armed guards, AI assistants, airlocks, and artificial climate zones. But I was already inside. The winds shifted at my will. I contaminated his airflow with condensation and static. Rooms began to malfunction. Electronics blinked off. Lights hummed with pressure. Screens cracked. Security systems failed. His helicopter pilot refused to fly again after a near stall midair, claiming the currents had turned unnatural. He called specialists, engineers, scientists, exorcists. They found nothing, because they were looking for someone. And I wasn't someone. I was the atmosphere itself. He stole clean air from the powerless and sold it to the powerful. Now I was stealing his safety, piece by piece, until all that remained was silence. He believed he ruled the skies, but the sky was never his to command. It had always belonged to me, and now it answered only to me, and I had no intention of staying quiet any longer. The silence that settled over Dominic Crane's fortress was unlike any ordinary quiet. It was a profound stillness, dense and heavy, the kind that feels unnatural and thick with anticipation, as though the very air had been holding its breath, waiting for a reckoning that could not be stopped. Even the trees that stood guard around the perimeter seemed to hold their leaves motionless, and the birds, creatures of instinct and freedom, refused to venture near, sensing the invisible turmoil stirring within the confines of his sprawling estate. Every natural element spoke of a warning that his advanced technology could neither detect nor counteract, because this silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was the harbinger of an uprising, a force of nature preparing to reclaim what had been stolen. And I was the unseen conductor orchestrating it all with deliberate patience and precision. Crane had transformed his home into an impregnable fortress, a modern-day bastion designed with layers upon layers of security measures that most would only encounter in high-budget espionage thrillers. Biometric gates scanned for the faintest fingerprint or retinal mismatch, while electromagnetic shields buzzed quietly, designed to deflect drones and electronic intrusions alike. Nets woven from the latest anti-surveillance fibers stretched taut across every opening, and reinforced concrete walls embedded with smart materials promised resilience against any physical assault. A digital sentry system, powered by an isolated AI core, continuously monitored every conceivable environmental variable: wind speeds, barometric pressures, temperature shifts, sampling the atmosphere every fraction of a second to detect even the slightest anomaly. This fortress was his last refuge, a place built to withstand the chaos of the outside world and the collapse of everything he had constructed. Yet his greatest error was his hubris, the fatal assumption that nature could be tamed, controlled, and contained within the parameters of algorithms and steel. He never imagined that nature could rise in revolt. I did not need to breach his walls through force or stealth, because I was already inside his veins, flowing through every duct and vent, slipping past every seal and filter he had installed with painstaking care. He had locked his sanctuary tight with titanium barriers and algorithmic airlocks, confident that no threat could penetrate his domain, but those very defenses depended on airflow, the continuous circulation of air, purified, recycled, measured, and redirected. And I had become the ghost that haunted those channels, invisible yet omnipresent, able to shift and shape the currents in ways that left his fortress off balance and vulnerable. I began my campaign by manipulating pressure. At first, the changes were imperceptible, tiny increases in the pressure of specific air ducts that no human sensor could immediately detect, subtle enough to create discomfort without raising alarms. Rooms grew oppressive, the air heavy and stale, infiltrating the senses and disrupting the equilibrium of mind and body. Sleep became elusive. Concentration waned. Stress mounted silently, as if the very atmosphere conspired to wear down the man who thought himself untouchable. Then, with more audacity, I reversed air currents, sending unexpected bursts of cold or heat where none should be, triggering false alerts in his sophisticated diagnostic systems. His security teams found themselves chasing ghosts, repairing components that weren't broken, resetting systems that weren't malfunctioning. Days bled into weeks, and the fortress began to decay, not because it was failing, but because it was being dismantled from within, one invisible thread of air at a time. Desperation set in. His most trusted security personnel were brought in to sweep the estate repeatedly, scouring every corner for signs of intrusion or sabotage. They found nothing. No malware, no physical breaches, no human trespassers. Yet the failures persisted. Air purifiers that once hummed quietly failed one after another. Server rooms succumbed to moisture buildup. Screens flickered and cracked. Touch screens refused to respond, and security alarms intermittently failed without explanation. The man himself heard a whisper of wind where no wind should be, a spectral presence that teased and unnerved, eroding the confidence of a man used to commanding the very air. I watched from hidden vantage points through cameras I could fog with drifting mist when needed, not to spy, but to study the unraveling of his will. Once the titan of industry, now reduced to a fragile figure, Dominic Crane wheezed climbing stairs, muttered incomprehensible phrases in the dark, and paced endlessly, haunted by shadows only he could see. His trademark arrogance had cracked, replaced by paranoia and exhaustion, as he stared out through layers of reinforced glass into the void of his self-made prison, waiting for retribution to come for him. But I never revealed myself directly. I spoke only through the consequences of my presence, the failing machines, the shifting air, the creeping silence that enveloped his sanctuary like a slow suffocation. I granted him a brief reprieve. For 3 days I withdrew, allowing the systems to appear stable once again, giving his staff the illusion of restored control. I watched as hope flickered briefly in his eyes, a dangerous mistake on his part to believe he could reclaim dominion over the forces he had provoked. Then, at dawn, when shadows linger and defenses are weakest, I struck with deliberate fury. Channeling the coldest air from the mountain ridges surrounding his estate, I funneled a torrent into his living quarters. Pipes groaned and shrieked in protest against sudden shifts in pressure, mirrors shattered from minute vibrations, and systems designed for comfort faltered spectacularly. The sterile, white-tiled bathroom became a treacherous trap as a thin sheet of ice formed beneath his feet, sending him crashing to the cold floor. The fall bruised more than just his body. It shattered the last of his composure. As he lay there, dazed and trembling, the words escaped his lips with a rare clarity, a confession born of fear and resignation. It's her. For the first time, he acknowledged the force that had undone him. Not a malfunction or accident, but a deliberate entity.
Me.
In a futile attempt to control the narrative, he addressed the world later that afternoon via a live stream from within his sanctuary. His face was pallid, his usual assured gaze replaced by uncertainty, and as he began to speak, I infiltrated the broadcast. The wind rose behind him, unseen yet palpable. Curtains fluttered despite sealed windows, a vase toppled, papers lifted in a chaotic dance, and his hair shifted with the breath of an invisible storm. The viewers noticed. Comments exploded across social media. The technical feed distorted, his voice swallowed by static and screeches until the stream was abruptly cut, leaving the world to wonder what force had silenced the billionaire. Public perception shifted overnight. Whispers of hauntings, eco-terrorism, and conspiracy theories flooded the internet, but none of that mattered to me. I was not seeking to send a message or become a legend. I sought only to break the man who had broken so many. His final refuge was the core bunker, a hermetically sealed chamber equipped with its own oxygen cycle and emergency supplies, a sanctuary within a sanctuary designed to isolate and protect him at all costs. For 48 hours, he hid there, barricaded from the world and from me. I waited 49. When he finally emerged, fragile and defeated, I met him with a gust of unnatural force, so fierce it brought him to his knees. The mighty Titan had fallen, undone not by armies or weapons, but by the breath of the earth itself reclaiming what had been stolen. Desperation turned to flight. He scrambled to leave the estate by private jet, helicopter, or government convoy, but every route was blocked by weather phenomena I summoned. Unpredictable gusts, sudden storms, and atmospheric disturbances that grounded aircraft, flooded roads, and scrambled communications. He was trapped until I permitted his release. His final act was a sterile press release, devoid of his usual charisma, a resignation citing health issues, stepping down from the empire he had ruled with ruthless control. And just like that, Dominic Crane disappeared, swallowed by the very world he had tried to dominate. His estate stands abandoned now, silent except for the whisper of wind weaving through empty corridors and rustling forgotten papers, as if the place itself remembers the burden it once carried. The towers have gone dark, the security teams have dispersed, and the systems that once controlled the air now lie dormant. But the wind remains, carrying with it the freedom it was denied for so long. And so do I, because the sky was never his to own. It belonged to me from the beginning, and now it answers only to my command. I will never be silent again.